everyone is now looking at a long, hard winter, whether, frankly, they're in a Russian trench or a Ukrainian trench.
Time to invite you into our daily briefing room, where we can talk to one of our leading tactical and strategic experts about the war in Ukraine. Welcome then to General Sir Richard Barrons, former Joint Forces Commander. Richard, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Let's talk about winter in Ukraine for a moment and the challenge that it's going to be. I've seen the damage inflicted on Ukrainian energy infrastructure has been colossal, and the price of firewood has apparently gone very steeply upwards in Ukraine. And I also see that the warning has gone out to Ukrainians from the government: beware of going into the woods to gather that firewood, because mines have been laid there. It's such a grim background, Richard, isn't it? It is a test of the spirits and the endurance of the Ukrainian people. And here's the point: it's going to present a challenge to political and other leaders to keep morale and spirit high. And there must be a plan and measures in place to do that.
Yes, I think the first point is that where Russia has tried to break the will of the Ukrainian people by turning off the supply of electricity just as winter hits and the first snows are now falling, historically, that has generally not worked. It's made people angry, but no less committed. But it is going to be hard, and Ukraine will be doing everything it can to protect its electricity system. And that extends to improving its air defenses, which are coming on pretty well, but they'll never be entirely foolproof, and repairing the electricity system and having things like standby generators where they can be found.
Yes.
And everyone is now looking at a long, hard winter, whether, frankly, they're in a Russian trench or a Ukrainian trench.
Yeah, I mean, a suggestion I've seen today is that we could see blackouts in Ukraine now enduring until the end of March. And I wonder how far can the West, this is not a strictly military question, but it does bear on the military effort. I wonder how far can the West help with that? We are talking, in some cases, about major reconstruction, aren't we?
So as a rule of thumb, repairing electrical infrastructure where it has suffered massive damage, like an entire power station, I mean, that can be a 5-year project. But the West can do things such as supplying power from Western Europe through connector cables into Ukraine, but also supplying perhaps spare parts and technical expertise in advising on how the repairs should be made. And we should recognize that Russia is able to strike the length and breadth of Ukraine based on its missile strikes, but it probably doesn't have so many missiles left that it's going to pose total risk to this power system over the winter. But we should recognize that this conflict, and you described it very well, is a lot more than military. There are levers in play here to do with power and water and food and information that are just as important in how this conflict is managed.
And I suppose Ukraine does have an extraordinarily valuable asset in the person of Volodymyr Zelensky, who has a gift for rallying the spirit of his people. And this on top of an enormously sophisticated capacity for using social media and advanced, as it were, production techniques as they can be used in this sort of situation.
That's absolutely so. The president has become this iconic figure in this war, although I think many people would agree there were some missteps from the Ukrainian side last week when they seemed to persist in insisting that the missiles that fell in Poland were Russian missiles, when it became pretty clear to most others that they were Russian air defense missiles, and people accepted that. And the Ukrainians know that the information campaign that they're waging is absolutely central to the way they will or will not succeed in this war. And the key to this is making sure that we in the West keep supplying money, weapons, ammunition, spare parts, and political will, because without that, they will not be able to overcome the Russian presence in their country.
On the purely military front, as you say, there's a limited supply of state-of-the-art modern Russian missiles to aim at energy targets and so on. But you can achieve a good deal of destruction with lower tech weaponry like drones. Are they easier to deal with? Presumably they are, to take down a drone on a strike than a missile.
It's a very interesting question. So an Iranian 136 drone costs about $20,000, not the $3 million that a cruise missile would cost. It travels more slowly. It goes at about 100 miles an hour. It doesn't defend itself, and the warhead on the end is 80 kilograms of high explosive, not 400 kilograms of high explosive. So yes, they are easy to shoot down. The problem is that the air defense systems that Ukrainian side relies on are these very expensive air defense systems generally supplied by the West, where you're essentially using a missile that might cost at least hundreds of thousands of dollars to shoot down a $20,000 drone. So yes, one of the keys to Ukraine now, and indeed for the rest of us, and the way we look at our air and missile defense, is to find ways of catching up with cheap technology that allows you to shoot drones down. And there are some very interesting ideas that rely on things like Silicon Valley innovation. So, this will go in a cycle. But right now, using expensive missiles to shoot down cheap drones is not a sustainable place.
And when you say using Silicon Valley technology to shoot down drones, what do you mean by that? I'm just intrigued.
So, if you look at the ability to see into the sky using a range of sensors like radar and thermal image cameras, now you have the ability of using artificial intelligence to track and identify targets and to prioritize a response. And amongst the responses is, for example, not using a missile to shoot down a drone, but using a bullet. So you can build a rifle sight that will take charge of a rifle and fire bullets that cost £1 at the drones with some certainty that it will hit it. Or you can use artificial intelligence to fly a drone into a drone. And all of this relies on the application of technology, that most of which has been developed in the civil sector.
Wow. I mean, just the use of a rifle to shoot down a drone, and that's possible using, I presume, sort of artificially aided aiming and firing technology.
Yeah, it's exactly that. So it's a rifle sight with artificial intelligence built into it, and you point the sight at the drone, and the sight then essentially takes charge of the rifle and will fire the bullet when it's got the right solution to get the bullet at the drone. And if, for example, you had 10 infantry soldiers all with a sight like that, they are going to shoot the drone down because the drone is a relatively easy, slow-moving target.
Really interesting. Thanks for your expertise as always. That's General Sir Richard Barrons in our briefing room today.